Hello everybody, welcome back to another Coach's Log. This is Coach Rob, owner of Positive Performance Coaching, where you can check out many blog articles and podcasts at positiveperformancecoaching.com. Today I want to get straight to the point and talk to you guys and gals a little bit about some things to think about as we start to approach the trailing end of the season. Some of us are going to cross over into cyclocross, gravel riding, and maybe even some friendly rides and friendly group runs and things like that. I mean, at least what the pandemic will allow for. And right now, what I'm starting to talk to folks about is that preparation. There is a period of time from the end of your race and your event season and the beginning of the off season, and we call it preparation. Part of it is that we need to do some things differently. We're going to take a little bit of a break, potentially, depending on the athlete's goals, their current state of fitness, their motivation has a lot to do with it, because we certainly don't want people to break down. So in that time frame, we start thinking about how do we still stay active without having a focus or concentration on our primary sport? Well, it's called cross-training. This is probably not something you're unfamiliar with, but understanding some of the nuances could really help you have a much better go at it if you are new. Or if you've been cross-training in the past, you may get some new ideas here on how to support your off-season that much better. So cross-training is nothing more than an auxiliary form of training. We've talked about this on the show. I'll try to have a little link up here in just a second. And it's in support of your sport. So whether you're a cyclist, a runner, multi-sport athlete, rower, what have you, there are other sports that need to function and seem similar to what you're already doing. Now, not all cross-training directly correlates or is 100% functional compared to the sport you're in. For instance, cycling is a very tricky sport to find other activities in support of it that keep you fit and motivated, as well as following the similar functional movement patterns that you would come up with on a bike. But that's okay, because sometimes just being able to go to a different sport or a different physical activity could help you shore up some weaknesses that you may not be familiar with. And as I said earlier, it's often going to be prescribed, at least in this practice, in that time frame that goes from, again, the tail end of your event and race season and the beginning of off season. We're going to schedule cross-training 3 to 4 times a week. And what you want to make sure is that you have a day cushion in between those days. Now, that day cushion could be going back to your original sport, your sport of choice, whether it could be a run, a swim, or a ride, in between those cross-training days. And usually cross-training is not very involved. Okay, we're talking about 30, 90 minutes maximum. And which time is it? Well, it also depends kind of on the amount of training volume or the active hours you spend each year training. So if somebody is new to this, maybe you're brand new amateur runner, cyclist, multi-sport athlete, you might want to think about going towards that lower end in the 30, maybe 40 minute. If you are someone that's been doing this for a very long time and you're approaching elite or elite status, you might be looking at 90 minutes to up to 2 hours of cross-training, 2 to 3, maybe 4 times a week. And the time span for this is around 6 to 8 weeks. Once again, it has a lot to do with your practice, your training plans. What are your goals for the upcoming year? What is it that you're trying to accomplish? And I'll give you an example. In my particular case, areas of importance for me going into the upcoming year are going to be less about gross strength and more in the functional area around core and flexibility. So instead of what I would call my typical practice of various resistance-based weightlifting, I'm probably going to streamline that into more of a core and flexibility program for myself. Some of this has to do with simply not having access to a gym right now with the pandemic. The other aspects to this has to do with my simple observations out in the field, racing, training, riding, and preparing to race. And you start to learn where you're starting to feel like things aren't working well for you. So you've got to start backtracking. Well, okay, I didn't feel good on the bike, and this is why I don't think I felt good on the bike. What can I do in support of that? And sometimes there are conflicting things I know that I could do, but it wouldn't support me well in that time frame. This is the time of the year to address that. So remember, it's about 6 to 8 weeks. So that would put you out somewhere, if you were to start in October, that would put you out into December and maybe even early January once you would return back to your normal focus. Remember this too, though. If you're listening to this video log and you're coming from more of the Australia and Southeast Asia areas, you're probably going to be looking at different dates. Remember, this happens prior to the off season and the trailing end of your race season. The other thing too that I think people misunderstand about cross training, intensity does not have to be tough. Quite honestly, you're probably looking at something in the neighborhood of zone 2 heart rate and or power. And that could look very different for you depending on the cross training you're thinking about undertaking. If you're doing primarily core conditioning, yoga, and things like that, you can certainly get your heart rate into zone 2. It doesn't have to be there the entire time. As a matter of fact, you're probably going to spend the vast majority of your time down in zone 1. So it's 1 to 2 at the highest, and that's for both power and heart rate. So that goes to the point where you're like, wait a minute, Rob, who measures power when they're doing yoga? You don't. But there are other cross-training activities that could actually bring some benefit to you that do measure power, and we're going to talk about that right now. So in this practice, I spend a lot of time coaching cyclists, runners, and multi-sport athletes. Multi-sport athletes come in all shapes, forms, fashions, and all types of disciplines. But primarily we're talking about those folks that are involved in cycling, running, swimming, and maybe a different sport such as kayaking, canoeing, or some rowing component. And in all of these scenarios, you'd be surprised to learn that there are some sports that are more appropriate than others. So let's just jump right in and talk about cyclists first. In support of cycling, you've got cross-country skiing, rowing, jogging, hiking, and yoga. Those are just a handful of examples. There are many other things that you could undertake that could also potentially help you. Depending on age, your range of motion, your current injury status, that sort of thing, there could be other alternatives, such as potentially rock climbing. That's another one that could actually show some benefit. And when you start talking about running, runners could benefit from cross-country skiing, rowing, cycling, hiking, and yoga, and as well as the climbing. And multi-sport athletes are pretty much in the same space. The difference is that you'll should note, I probably would not use cycling as an activity for a multi-sport athlete because cycling is part of your program. I would say this, when multi-sport athletes are getting started, first triathlon, duathlon, aquathon, aquabike, Xterra, that sort of thing, you have to recall this. Unless it's aquabike, aquathon, and duathlon, you're training for more than one sport. And in that, you're probably not going to excel at least one of the three. And the same thing goes for you guys and gals that are just doing 2 sports in your multi-sport endeavors. You're not going to necessarily excel at both. So what you have to do is take your time to find auxiliary training or the cross training that could benefit the sport that is lacking. This is a great time of the year to start working on some of those weaknesses, those areas that seem to be plaguing you. So that's cross training in a nutshell. I've given you some opportunities and things to think about. You have the ability to schedule this. We're looking, once again, 6 to 8 weeks, probably no more than 30 to 90 minutes at a stretch. You want to make sure that you've got a day of padding between each one of those, where you're doing yet again something that is aerobic in nature but very low impact. And then, of course, you want to make sure that it happens just as you are leaving your race and event season and starting to head into the off season. So I hope this is helpful. There are many sports that I did not cover, of course. These are the ones that I've mentioned that are primarily used in my practice. There are many things that can be done in support of these auxiliary sports to your own sport. If you have examples or you have questions about these, if you're one of my athletes, we can certainly cover this on our next call. If you have other ideas, you're not one of my athletes and have questions, leave a comment and I will get back with you. Okay, everybody, have a great rest of your training week and we'll talk again very soon.